Mr. President, we cannot allow a mine shaft gap.
According to Devika Singh and Sujin VT, at the Georgia Institute of Technology, the severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, SARS-CoV-2, is responsible for the ongoing global outbreak of a coronavirus disease, and other viruses in the same phylogenetic group have been responsible for previous regional outbreaks, including SARS and MERS. These biologists had concluded in 2021 that SARS-CoV-2 has a zoonotic origin, similar to the causative viruses of these previous outbreaks, and had suggested that the repetitive introduction of animal viruses into human populations resulting in disease outbreaks suggests that similar future epidemics are inevitable. Similarly, by September 2021, evolutionary biologist Edward C. Holmes would join Christian G. Anderson, the author of the most referenced zoonotic origins theory report, to conclude that failure to comprehensively investigate the zoonotic origin through collaborative and carefully coordinated studies would leave the world vulnerable to future pandemics arising from the same human activities that have repeatedly put us on a collision course with novel viruses. Dr. Singh N.E. at Georgia Institute of Technology had warned that understanding the molecular origin and ongoing evolution of SARS-CoV-2 will provide critical insights for preparing for and preventing future outbreaks, and they had noted that a key feature of SARS-CoV-2 is its propensity for genetic recombination across host species boundaries. According to these biologists, this suggests that the genome of SARS-CoV-2 harbors signatures of multiple recombination events, likely encompassing multiple species and broad geographic regions. Further, other regions of the SARS-CoV-2 genome show the impact of purifying selection. The spike S protein of SARS-CoV-2, which enables the virus to enter host cells, exhibits signatures of both purifying selection and ancestral recombination events, leading to an effective S protein capable of infecting human and many other mammalian cells. However, as many may recall, at the beginning of the global public health crisis, now attributed to almost 7 million fatalities worldwide, even Dr. Anderson had expressed his convictions that the genome had appeared to have been manipulated, giving support to the arguments of a growing number of persons across America that COVID-19, which has claimed the lives of over 1 million Americans, had originated not from nature, but rather from what has been described as the lab leak theory. What support, beyond the early opinions expressed by Dr. Anderson in an email sent to Dr. Anthony Fauci on January 31, 2020, exists to support a laboratory origin? Some may not have noticed a news report broadcasted by CNN health and medical expert Dr. Sanjay Gupta on January 24, 2020, where he had claimed that the origins of the virus may have been tied to Chinese kite or king cobra. However, at least a virologist or even a microbiologist would know that while there are over 3,000 coronaviruses that infect mammals, and over 3,000 coronaviruses that infect birds, there are no coronaviruses that infect reptiles, like snakes, and yet, by February 2020, Wei Ji had confirmed that this novel coronavirus had possessed an Ophidian codon usage bias, or snake affinity, which would be quite obviously an aberration from nature that was early known within at least the scientific community, which has continued to promote vaccines, as well as the natural origin theory. By November of 2020, Dr. John Lednicki, who has an acknowledged proprietary interest, as the holder of a patent for PCR tests, had suggested that he had determined the infectious dose required to infect a human host, which, even to date, according to the CDC, remains a metric still unknown, even after 3 years of the current global public health crisis. However, by January 2021, Dr. Lednicki had observed a far more intriguing finding regarding what are known to be not only the largest class of viruses but also the largest in genome mass, having determined the size of the virions, or smaller breakoffs from the larger SARS-CoV-2 particle that can reach up to 1.4 microns in size. He had measured virions between 0.25 and 0.50 microns, which would be larger than normal expectation for a coronavirus that has been known to have possessed high enzymatic at its core simply to keep it from falling apart, limiting the potential size of any virions. And yet far more intriguing, Dr. Lednicki had reported, without further elaboration, that the virions had appeared to have defied computational fluid dynamics, possessing a gain of function that had evolved into a capability to locate other virions and mass to deliver a viral load not with a normalized distribution against an area target, like a shotgun, but rather presenting a tight shot group against a point target, which would be an appealing feature to a biological weapons developer. Having the ability, in sufficient exposure, to defeat even industrial-grade and military-grade respiratory protection, but according to notable evolutionary biologists this gain of function had been acquired simply through natural selection and not a feature that had been manipulated in a lab. An early, but withdrawn, study in preprint, published by Prashant Pradhan in January 2020, had suggested that we found 4 insertions in the spike glycoprotein S, which are unique to the 2019 nCoV and are not present in other coronaviruses, and, importantly, amino acid residues in all the 4 inserts have identity or similarity to those in the HIV-1 GP120 or HIV-1 GAG. One study, published by Arno Boix-Besora in January 2022, had first evaluated the cellular co-expression of SARS-CoV-2 spike glycoprotein with HIV-1 GAG, concluding that it has no significant negative effect in cell growth and viability, and reported that HIV-1 GAG VLPs share similar characteristics with wild-type severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, SARS-CoV-2 virus, making them a suitable platform for the expression of its spike membrane protein to generate a potential vaccine candidate for COVID-19. More recently, a study in which the notorious Batwoman, Shijing Li, had been a co-author, it was reported that, in our data, SARS-CoV-2 showed significant infection of activated T cells, suggesting there should be a new entry mechanism in T cells. The identification of LFA1 as an entry molecule that contributed to a SARS-CoV-2 infection of T cells would be important for developing clinical therapeutics, although future questions remain. Dr. Shah demonstrated that SARS-CoV-2 infected T lymphocytes, mainly CD4+ T cells, in an ACE2-independent manner. SARS-CoV-2 infection triggered pronounced T-cell death, which potentially contributed to lymphopenia in patients with COVID-19. And, this study found that, apart from the respiratory system, multiple organs including the immune system of COVID-19 patients were also targeted by SARS-CoV-2 infection. Notably, lymphopenia was observed in 83.2% of the patients on admission, and fatal infections were associated with more severe lymphopenia over time, and it is well acknowledged that lymphopenia, also called lymphocytopenia, is a disorder in which your blood doesn't have enough blood cells called lymphocytes, according to the NIH. AIDS patients routinely have lymphocytopenia, which arises from destruction of CD4+ T cells infected with HIV. The first breakthrough infections outbreak had involved gay men at Provincetown, almost 1,000 who had been fully vaccinated, and who would have been vulnerable to these facets of the HIV virus in SARS-CoV-2, and HIV-positive men have experienced a case fatality rate 9 times higher than the national average, but, according to evolutionary biologists, who have been promoting the vaccines, the virus had naturally spilled over from a zoonotic source. Intriguingly, Even Dr. Anderson had acknowledged that as early as March 2020 there had been a uniquely American version of SARS-CoV-2 in Louisiana, distinct from the virus spreading in Europe and distinct from the virus spreading in Asia, finding a virus able to maintain its unique identity without spillover or wider spread, contained by geographic borders, a feature that had been demonstrated as well for the Delta variant that had emerged in India in October 2020, and which did not spread until early 2021 to the United Kingdom, with its own unique version of the strain, and to the US, with its own unique Delta variant strain. Moreover, from the earliest emergence in China through the Delta and Omicron variants that began to dominate, there has been the aberrant from normal infectious disease finding noted in scientific reports, discrete, clustered outbreaks with no wider community spread, appearing to be a virus that isn't stupid, spreading out of control but somehow, without the power of sentient thoughts, exercising discipline and control to respect geographical and physical borders, which, too, would be an attractive specification for a biological weapons developer. However, evolutionary biologists who have promoted the safe and effective vaccines continue to maintain that the virus had a perfectly natural origin, while some politicians have insisted that the origins cannot be resolved unless they are able to obtain full access to the laboratory in Wuhan. A widely promoted human challenge study in the first year of the pandemic but for which the results were not reported until late March 2022 had suggested, about a pathogen, about which early investigators from the WHO in February 2020 had concluded that it is not clear whether this correlates with the presence of an infectious virus, and hence wholly incapable, as a validated less than 5% secondary attack rate disease, of either zoonotically evolving or escaping from a laboratory to set off a pandemic, that they had proposed to establish a novel SARS-CoV-2 human challenge model that enables controlled investigation of pathogenesis, correlates of protection and efficacy testing of forthcoming interventions, and had 36 volunteers aged 18 to 29 years without evidence of previous infection or vaccination inoculated with 10 TCID50 of a wild-type virus, SARS-CoV-2/human/GBR/484861/2020, intranasally in an open-label, non-randomized study. According to the study, at day 28 after inoculation, 6 of 18, 33%, participants remained qPCR positive in the nose and 2 of 18, 11%, in the throat, but, by day 90, all participants were qPCR negative, but of a total of 36, even after these the healthy adult volunteers were challenged intranasally with SARS-CoV-2, only 18 had been infected, at all, with results suggesting, even in duration of illness, that some persons, for reasons not explained in this study, appeared to be far more susceptible to infection and outcomes than others. And, it is not clear why, despite this much promoted study, the CDC has yet to publish an official infectious dose for COVID-19, while evolutionary biologists who have promoted the safe and effective vaccines continue to maintain that the virus had a perfectly natural origin, while some politicians have insisted that the origins cannot be resolved unless they are able to obtain full access to the laboratory in Wuhan. It was known that in China the virus had demonstrated, in the largest city in the central mainland, what had appeared to be a targeting preference for farmers and farming families, just as aboard the Diamond Princess, a commercial cruise liner that had departed port from Yokohama, the virus had presented a targeting preference for Americans. However, the far more intriguing finding by the CDC aboard the Diamond Princess was the recovery of viable samples found on unknown surfaces that were still viable up to 17 days after cabins were vacated, but no viable samples have ever been recovered from a nasopharyngeal swab more than 5 days out, which would suggest that the recovered viable samples were not the result of natural human shedding of viral load, but rather had been attributed to some other as of yet unidentified source. Most appealing, at least to a biological weapons developer, is the fact that in March 2020, Jasper Fakhuchon had determined that the infectious dose required to infect just a Syrian hamster had ranged between 100,000 and 10 million, which should, under normal conditions, require far more to infect a human, indicating a uniquely adapted biological agent, while the Killingsley study, published in late March 2022, suggests that there is great potential, especially given the known populations demonstrated to have been vulnerable to COVID-19, that a biological agent could be developed to be targeted and surreptitiously deployed against demographics in populations identified by age, sex, ethnicity or other factors, while presenting to the untrained victims the appearance of a perfectly natural, even if tragic, disease outbreak. However, evolutionary biologists who have promoted the safe and effective vaccines continue to maintain that the virus had a perfectly natural origin, while some politicians have insisted that the origins cannot be resolved unless they are able to obtain full access to the laboratory in Wuhan. Still, according to Sun Tzu, all warfare is based upon deception, while according to WHO Director Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, we underestimate this virus at our own peril, and this virus has fooled us before.
This message was approved by Major Mike Webb, Honest.